All right, Guillermina, you were listening everything. Yes, I did everything that was said so far. We shared a few notions. I remember when Florencia finished with her talk, and I have several things to ponder and to speak of with you in this half hour. But before that, I would like to give you some time for you to spontaneously tell us your feeling about what you heard. How do you see it? Is it something we could do? Is it attainable? Is it impossible? I feel it's necessary. That's what I could say. It is necessary. We are in dire need for it. I was saying regarding Florencia's talk, and I could also say about Philip's talk, that if you went to the province of Buenos Aires and make your presentations on your way out, they would hang you, kind of thing. Yes. Why people would go against it, but here many laugh because they know about our situation there in some Argentine provinces as well, but it's not just in some more than in other provinces. Rather, it is a topic that is kind of that is like cross-border. It's among many Latin American countries. There's a great dispute between a certain explicit teaching methodology and one where you place on the child the possibility of the child, him or herself, to build his or her own learning process. And so this is that is what's the central core of the dispute, not just in Argentina, but especially in Argentina. Now I'm speaking about Argentina. This also happens when we talk about the method to teach math. This also happens when we talk about how to teach science. I mean, there is like, how do I say it? There's a dispute based on beliefs more than on scientific evidence, let's say. Okay, I'd like to first talk about the region and then speak about Argentina. But now you mentioned this, and I love to detour the conversation. So, when you say that there is an explicit method that has been established for a few years, but that explicit method, is it thought of and then becomes explicit, or has it been explored and there was a special practice going on, and over time it became explicit, but through practice and not because it was designed like that way? Did you understand my question? Well, let me clarify something. When I speak of an explicit method, I am posing an intervention, an explicit intervention methodology of the teacher in students' learning. And there's a different one, a separate one, where the teacher prepares the field, so to speak, but does not intervene. So they're two separate methods. The first one, the former, in other words, the explicit one, almost everybody's too young, I should say here. But I learned with a certain method that was pretty similar to the one mentioned before. And if I had to teach a child, I would recall something of how I was taught, and that's how I would teach. So there's a colleague who is working on this, looking at the different publications for teachers from the beginning of the century. And in those publications, the core problem was what was the best teaching method for writing as well as for science and reading, writing, and math. Today, that discussion is not in the limelight. And in the case of Argentina, there is something that is even worse and more alarming, and that is, and now I'm speaking about the academy, I'm thinking about specialists, about academicians. They don't consider the problem of children learning. They don't focus on that. Okay, now we kind of know what this is about. Now, how about the region? I was in an event in Lima, Peru, yesterday and the day before. Very interesting meeting. There were ministries, private and public sector, public policy members. I relate this to what Florencia also mentioned in such a short time, how much they learned. And I was so much impressed by the willingness of trying to find a solution with multiple players. And the idea was to think of a design, a general design, and I have to underscore this. But I remember at the end of the meeting, the Minister of Education presented all the programs being encouraged by the government, and he showed a video of children talking about their schools. It was hard for me to understand their language, and these were children who were speaking a comprehensible language to me. But not only was it didn't I did not understand it because of how they pronounced, but in some cases they had different dialects. Yes. And what happens in Peru happens also in Brazil, in Chile. So they have so many local languages and native languages as well. So my question is, this possible solution guided, science guided, let's say, in a multiple language area, does that imply a different implementation system or not? Because we don't have that problem, or at least it's not as significant. We may have urban or suburban languages, but it's not as marked. There are two different things in this. One is what you're just saying, the different languages and the need, and also the challenge of literacy for a single communication language. I say that I'm unable to say that this method or this other method, things will be better. I can't say that. But what I dare say, or rather I talk about it because this has been already posed in linguistics, in education sociology. Language, and for language, it is of paramount importance for print and for reading and writing comprehension. Language as a resource is not distributed the same among the population at large. So the school gets children with different linguistic resources. But they spoke about linguistic codes that are complex and others that were more elementary. So the school does okay with the complex linguistic code, almost naturally, I should say. And in all of Latin America, we have a lot of population whose linguistic code is not user-friendly with what the school demands. Some of them, the children, have not socialized. In their socialization, they didn't have a linguistic stimulus to develop themselves later with more ease. So for those children, we are applying a methodology where we leave them almost alone, so that the child, him or herself, goes ahead with the process. So the majority of these students don't learn. They don't undergo the process. They need the intervention of a teacher, of a faculty member. We know this also from sociology. Children, or let's say to counteract the strong presence of neurosciences here, I bring the contribution of sociology to the table. And sociology has shown from far back that such population that has linguistic resources that are more limited, let's say, these require explicit pedagogies that's visible with direct intervention. And so it's paradoxical, because in one area where we have a percentage, a high percentage of the population comprising maybe different or low social cultural status with very scarce resources for schooling, that's where we're using a method that does not accompany them, that does not help them, or to the contrary, they are abandoned to their own resources because of the methodology itself and its design. Would you say that in Argentina here this is the battle? Is this battle, quote unquote, just to call it somehow, more worse than that in favor of math? Because I know we have several battles here. They're like these two pillars. But why do we say one or the other? Well, I'm asking you rather. It's not that I'm saying it's one or the other. Well, of course, we have to battle for a teaching or learning methodology that is equitable, and also in math. And in math, we're even worse than in language. And it seems as if we're going towards a very techie world where skills and knowledge regarding math are more and more necessary. And so, if the children of the future will have to know how to program, well, they're going to have to know some math. But yet, 60% of children out of high school don't reach the satisfactory level needed for math. So you wouldn't give a greater hierarchy to the print literacy than math. No, but I would not give anyone up for the other. No. We've really made progress in our sophistication. I mean, we're very, very much advanced, as I said, in great sophistication to reflect theoretically upon each one of the disciplines taught. And when we think about methodology and the question on how children learn, we are absolutely, how can I say, we have no resources whatsoever. And I'm speaking about the system, the educational system. Of course, there are people or teams who are working on that, of course. And we have a hope that we may hear more of what we're talking about here. That's it. You were also mentioning, Guillermina, the performance in math and the tragedy, if you would, of numbers. I think Andrés Delich mentioned that at the beginning. So the goal for learning has a special feature, which is that there is like a census measurement in Argentina. Before that, there were sample sizes. So this is a little more representative, if you would. So this year and last year's programs, 2016 programs, covered, I think, 1 million examinations in 4 different levels, 24 jurisdictions, public and private schooling. So everything was covered, kind of. So what you're saying in terms of math, which is also applied for natural and social sciences, and of course for reading comprehension, emerges from that census. So my question to you is, so the goals to learn, aren't they like a mirror of the teachers and how teachers are teaching? Because we say teachers are the future, but also, not you, of course, you guys are the exception. But we're talking about the levels of learning. Isn't this like a mirror shape? Yes, of course. Yes, that is true. Many times they go through elementary school without reading or writing. But let me clarify one thing. If you look at the results, the outcomes of different countries in Latin America, almost all countries have made progress, and Argentina, it lags behind. And you notice and you see, for instance, Chile. Chile is leading the way, in the list, not because competition is so important, but we ask ourselves what's happening with other countries that are making progress and others are not. And so, in Argentina, we have this strong issue that what is being planned hardly reaches then the grassroots. So the one who is at the grassroots have a structure like in the case of print literacy. It is totally they they have this methodology that, as I said, they are all geared towards the fact that they have to be free, autonomous, learn by themselves, and not invade them, etc., etc. So this is what took over. I'm thinking about the word not. In Peru, there was the figure were four pencils that were knotted together with different colors, and they said, you have to talk, they told the minister, with that knot in your hand, and he was responsible for that symbol, which was the conference's symbol. Which would you say here is the main knot? In this student you just mentioned, or in this learning method, is the methodology mainly, or is it the environment, or is it the type of student schools have today, or is it the family? I mean, there's something that it pervades, is more, yes, methodology. Yes, the teaching methodology. Because although it is true that children sometimes come from very complicated homes and environments, it is also true. Let me just tell you, this is anecdotal. I took a cab, a taxi, and I don't know what happened, but the taxi drivers realize that we are in education. I don't know how, but they know. So we're in the education field. So they say, oh, so you are working in education. Well, because we don't leave a tip. That's why we don't leave tips. And so, yes, and so he tells me, you know what? You know, I have a little girl who goes to school and she doesn't learn. She's in second grade and she hasn't learned how to read or write. I go to school and I tell the teacher, and the teacher says, well, she'll learn in time. But my wife was very impatient, and so she said, you know, I'm going to teach my child how to read and learn. And she did it. And she did. She taught her. So, what do I mean by this? The problem is that there is no real attention, an appropriate attention towards the student. When you reach seventh grade and you haven't learned how to read or write, it's because he's an invisible student. He's there, but he's not. So there is no appropriate attention towards the student, and there's no methodology to teach that child how to read or write. How is that? How is it that a teacher finds a group of children at school who are not learning how to read and write? What could that teacher do? Well, maybe read stories to them or bring some material to them, but that teacher cannot intervene directly with an explicit method. So if you review all the syllabus, it is something that I did for today, or the curricula, which is to review all the elementary school curricula in different countries in Latin America, you will find that it's very ambiguous in terms of the teaching methodology in print literacy. What is the ambiguity for you? Okay, define it. There are few instruments, few tools. It's more like, let's see, it's more like a theoretical approach, an intent, if you would, but above all, an explanation, a theoretical explanation of things. And there is no, or at least I was listening now to Phyllis, and I would have loved to teach literacy, because she had an explicit methodology and the reasons why you had to act in such and such a way. And this you won't find it in any curricula in Latin America. And plus, you would fall in love with the results, because if you think about the results and then you have the child that comes out of school speaking and writing, and it works, it works, and it works. So, yes, it's true.
It's not that there's no experience in Argentina where a specific methodology is applied and children learn. There is an experience, there is some specific experience. Mendoza is working on this, but the outcome, the result, is not considered. It's not that we found the key to the problem. There are many interests in between. There is much bureaucracy, experts in the middle, and there's also an ideological confusion. It's difficult for people to penetrate that group. You cooperate with the Buenos Aires province government. Is there a room or there's a space to try such an approach in the province? I, I'm trying to engage you in public so that you can um, implement this in some 5,000 schools. The educational or the education system in the province of Buenos Aires is one of the largest in the country. And so we solve the problem of education in the province of Buenos Aires means solving the problem of education in most of the country. So when things go wrong in the education of the government of Buenos Aires, we don't care about the rest because it's very important. The Buenos Aires province is where this methodology has been most implemented, the psychogenetic methodology. Things have been done. We effected a change in the elementary school curriculum where we sort of authorized this methodology in the curriculum because nobody pays much attention to the curriculum up until you have to resource to the curriculum to ground your position, to back your position. So we provided training along those lines, but it is true that considering the huge number of schools and teachers, it is not easy to have an impact on the whole system. I was just talking to one of the persons who is working in an experience in the school networks in the province of Buenos Aires, and they're also introducing this methodology. You have to introduce it, so you have to prevent people from getting very angry with you and to hang you in the square. There are things to do. I tried, but I wasn't able to. I think that this is related to politics. I would like to put in place a campaign that covers all elementary schools, teachers, and training them on a methodology because teachers need it. What teachers do when makes a follow-up of the student and finds that the student still has a lot to learn, what the teacher does is doing what the taxi driver's wife did. She remembered the way she learned herself when she was a schoolgirl, and so she repeated the same thing with her child, with her daughter. I really follow your struggle, and I share and I know the difficulties that you are facing, and I know how energetic you are, or all the things you're doing to introduce modifications. The Argentine education system is complicated because it is managed jointly between the provinces and the national government. general policies are agreed upon by consensus, and each province has their own legislative body with committees that rule and regulate, and they're also in the middle of it the universities. So it is a very complex, it's difficult to grab. It's a system which is difficult to grab because the governance of this system is very complex, and it is very difficult to really impact on the system. It is all this complexity makes it stable, but it sort of develops antibodies to transformation, against transformation. I'd rather be more optimistic. I'm hardly ever am I optimistic, but if you see things that are going on in the country, you will find that there are many specific individual experiences that are really interesting. And this refers to change in reading and writing, teaching, as also change related to the structure of the education system. There is a step we didn't take. We weren't able to change that crazy structure of the system. So we conduct our experiences, or we do these experiments, but we don't change the infrastructures. And so when the administration changes, these experiences disappear, or and we come back to the beginning, to how things were before. The system we are implementing includes supporting schools, includes training teachers or school role models. So these are the people who contribute to the change in methodology. But this is done with the plan that has been conceived. But if you don't change the structure, because you have a very pyramidal or pyramid structure, that change goes away. So that plan dies.
No, te voy a hacer una última pregunta. No quiero meterme en el tema del futuro, la robótica, que en algún momento mencionaste. Porque no
This is a question that probably is not the topic of this event. You suggested something when you spoke about mathematics. A personal question. In your everyday practice, how scientific is your task as an educator? We are in an event where science, or the emerging understanding, I love that expression, should be guiding us in practice, and practice that includes policy design, but also practice, personal practice, individual practice of continuous education in the classroom. How scientific is your task when you do things, not when you discuss things? Rather, it's a very interesting question, because as you can see, I'm an elderly woman. So I've been working for many years, and I believe that as I've made progress in my work, I've become closer to the idea, and also had an academic experience in the past. It's only a short time ago that I started to work in something which is more practical, more related to everyday practice. So I'm open-minded now. It would really, you would have been surprised, or I would be surprised myself if I came to this event 10 years ago. But I want to come. I wanted to come because I want to learn, and I want to understand all the emerging elements that science is providing schools. But that's not the general trend. The general trend in education is clinging to their own assets. those of us who work on training really laugh at that, because whenever we propose something, the first reply or the first response is usually, oh, we know that. We started doing that many years ago. That won't help. This is something that you say because you are in the theory and you are not in everyday practice. So it's the ¿cómo era que se decía? The educational area is always reluctant to accept scientific innovations. It's like the wish to learn is the discovery that should be embedded in our practice. I think that we have a very generous world in terms of data and evidence, and there's no other way out than getting enthusiastic about that. But we need to rediscover ourselves as learners. If we don't see ourselves as learners, we won't give us the possibility to be meddling into things and looking up for new things in order to convert that or to transform that in a more relevant classroom experience, because we should be best learners than our students. I think that this is the best take-home message. Learning is fascinating as long as you have a sort of a container for your learning. And in the first presentation, it was difficult for me to learn, but learning is fascinating. I think that what we have to convey is that fascination in learning. If you don't have that link to knowledge, it is difficult to transmit that to children. So we need to open up to all this new development that is taking place in the last years and lately, and that has a lot to contribute to education.